Hey, Larken Rose here, doing another video about thinking, because too many people suck at it. Expertise is a thing. Somebody can know lots and lots about a particular subject. I know a fair amount about a bunch of different things, and in pretty much every single topic, there are lots of people who know way more than I do about it. I know music theory better than the vast majority of the population that knows nothing about it, and there's a ton of people who know way more about it than I do. I think I'm a better keyboard player than the vast majority of the population, most of whom don't play at all, and I'm not in the top 100,000 keyboard players. Maybe million? I don't know how many keyboard players there actually are in total. And that's true of a whole bunch of stuff. It's true of like what I understand about math and geometry. There are people way more advanced at that than I am. So on and so forth. The likelihood of me or you being the very top of any field of thought is pretty damn low. And there are people who are in almost the top and sort of compete with each other for, like, yeah, your expert level in whatever field of thought you have. Now, there's two directions that this can become a problem. And it's a problem in both directions. One is when people aren't even aware of the limits of their own understanding, and so they don't even recognize that there are lots of people who know way more than they do about almost any subject. So the people who know almost nothing about, like, math or physics can believe that the earth is flat because they don't understand what there is to know that they don't know. And people who don't understand math can think that Terrence Howard is brilliant when he says 1 × 1 is 2, because they don't understand anything and they don't know what it is to actually understand it. And they don't have the humility and the self-awareness to realize there are lots of people who know way more than you about it. Now, this brings us into the first problem. If you don't know a certain amount about some subject, you're in no position to say who does know a certain amount. So if somebody can come along and you don't know that much about geometry or math or physics, and somebody can say a bunch of big words that baffle you and you don't know what they mean, but it sounds like they know what they're talking about, like you didn't understand any of it, but it sounded impressive because they spewed out a bunch of terms and they seemed confident. If in that case you sort of defer to their expertise, that is a massive mistake, because you have no way to know if they have any expertise. You're just going on whether they sound confident and whether they sound like they know what they're talking about, even though you don't have the foggiest level of understanding that would allow you to actually be qualified to say if they know what the hell they're talking about. Now, a common example of this would be like car mechanics. Like, I mean, I'm sure it's above average what I know about the way cars work and all the pieces involved. Not very much above average, but above average just because a huge number of people drive cars around. They don't have the foggiest idea how any of it works. I have at least the foggiest idea how it works, so that puts me ahead of a lot of people. Now, am I a master car mechanic? No, I'm 8 billion levels below a master car mechanic. But I know enough that if I go to a mechanic and he goes, oh yeah, it's doing that because this thing is doing that, and we see this often, he can give me an explanation of something that he knows way more about than I do, but I can think, okay, that makes sense, and it seems to match my experience, and yeah, he seems to know more than I do, but at least I can kind of make some estimate of whether he's just making shit up or he actually knows what he's talking about. And that can be a challenge. And there's sort of the cliche thing of slimeball car mechanics taking advantage of women if they assume that women don't know anything about cars. And they'll literally, well, yeah, you definitely need to replace this and that and some other things that I'm just going to make up. You need to replace your schmerpeltookie because the quadrangle has bazonked the frajangle blogs. That'll be $5,000. Now, if you're in the position of the woman who doesn't know anything about cars, how the hell are you supposed to know if any of that meant anything? Well, did he sound confident? Well, that doesn't mean anything. Maybe he's just a good liar. So the thing is, and it's not just men and women, obviously, but the thing is, somebody who doesn't know anything about cars, if they like know a mechanic or know somebody who knows something, may bring them along and go, is he just totally making shit up? Or does this sound like something that kind of resembles reality as far as your level of understanding allows you to assess it? So if you're somewhere in the general range of, well, you understand this and the expert understands that, you can kind of make a half-decent guess of whether somebody is an expert. If you understand nothing and somebody is spewing crap and you have no idea what it is, then you're in no position to say anything at all about whether they're an expert or a bullshit artist or something in between or whatever. So one of those tests, and I'll stick with the car mechanic example. If you go, like if I go to the car mechanic and say, our car's doing this weird thing and it's making this weird noise and there's something wrong with the shifting and it does this weird thing. And I describe it as best I can and the mechanic goes, well, it sounds like it may be a this, that, the other thing, blah, blah, blah. And I listen and it's like, okay, I kind of get some of that I'm not an expert on it. I'm not all that familiar with it. If I then go back home and I tell Amanda, okay, it sounds like what the guy said is there's this wrong with that thing. Like, if I can put it into words, even if it's rough words and I don't remember all the terminology and I don't get all the specifics, but I have some idea that, okay, this thing is about it's about the automatic clutch, like not doing what it's supposed to because whatever it happens to be. If I can at least sort of convey what it was, it demonstrates that, okay, at least I know enough that I can sort of give a guess at least of whether this guy is just making shit up or whether he's actually describing a thing. And then I'll have to decide, or Amanda and I will have to decide, like, do we trust him enough based on what he said and how he's represented himself that if he says something needs to be done, it actually needs to be done. And that's why one of the most valuable things for a lot of people to have is a trusty mechanic. Somebody they know isn't making bullshit up. Like, that's really valuable because that can save you $1 gazillion. Whereas if you don't know enough that somebody can bullshit you and make you replace a huge amount of stuff that didn't need replacing, which car mechanics notoriously do, then you're just waiting to get robbed blind because of your ignorance, because you don't have a level of understanding to even judge the expertise of somebody above you. And so you can just be oblivious and not understand it. Now, so deferring to an expert is perfectly worthwhile and useful, but you have to understand that the first step is, are you in any position to decide whether somebody is an expert? Because somebody saying that they're an expert isn't anything. That doesn't mean they are. They could be a complete ignoramus. They could be a liar. They could be whatever. And if you don't have a high enough understanding to recognize somebody who knows more than you, in other words, they can explain the stuff you know and describe the stuff you know and then get into more specifics and say, well, yeah, this does that, but there's this thing that's also adding an influence of torque on the, whatever it is they're trying to explain. And you can go, okay, well, I recognized the stuff he said that matches what I actually know, and then there was some other stuff that I don't know, but he wasn't completely making crap up, so I can, hopefully figure out enough to decide whether I trust him, whether I dare to defer to his expertise. This is true in medicine, too. Like, all over the place, as people, doctors notoriously use a different language. They'll use the scientific names for everything, and they're trained in using terminology that makes them sound learned, because to a lot of people, that's comforting for the patients to have them speak in jargon that the patient doesn't understand. To me, that's really damn weird. And I like it when doctors and people in all sorts of fields do the opposite, where they can dumb it down to a level where they can explain it in layman's terms. Well, here's what's going on, and here's what we're seeing. And instead of, I'm going to use hoity-toity language to try to make you think I'm super genius, it's like, well, thanks, but I didn't understand a word you said, so you didn't do any good. You didn't communicate anything useful to me. The patient is suffering from a blah, blah, blah of unknown etiology. What does that mean? It means your leg hurts and we don't know why. So why didn't you just say that? Because unknown etiology sounds much cooler and more educated. So there's a lot of professions that do this. And people deferring to experts or who they think are experts just because they're sort of intimidated and impressed and ooh, ah, it sounds like he knows big words. Like that makes people susceptible to con artists and slime balls and experts who actually are experts but are going to take advantage of people who aren't, like car mechanics. He may be a perfectly good car mechanic, but if he's a slime ball and he recognizes, yeah, this person who just came in, they have no idea what's going on. They don't have the foggiest idea what's under the hood or how any of it works, so I'm going to trick them into, like, replacing the transmission or something, or replacing a few things that don't even exist, and then charging them $1 gajillion. So that deference to experts is actually a really important thing that we kind of have to do in a lot of different ways. But it helps to have, like, you don't know if you're deferring to an expert unless you have enough of an understanding in that field to know if they're just completely making crap up. Now, if your level of understanding isn't up by theirs, sort of comparable, then it's really hard to tell if they're just ripping you off or if they're, like, because they may know a bunch more than you, but they may or may not be telling you the truth. The doctor may say, well, I would suggest this really expensive surgery. And if you knew better, you'd say, that's dumb and completely unnecessary. But if you don't know better and you're scared and you're like, okay, I guess if you think that's what's best, here's $80 gajillion. So deferring to experts is, one, a very good and necessary thing if you have reason to believe they're an expert and you understand that the limits of your own understanding and education in that field are going to make it something that you can't and shouldn't do, whether it's medicine or plumbing or whatever the heck. Like, there's lots of people. Like, one thing I would call myself an expert on is taking trees down. Big dead trees, taking them down in a way that doesn't smash the crap out of houses and gardens and everything around, because the physics is very involved. If you want to see scary and disturbing example of what happens when people don't defer to experts, YouTube tree fails, and you'll see just horrible numbers of people who don't grasp the concept of center of mass or leverage or how much wood it takes to hold up a tree or how you do it so it hinges right. Now, and that's another fine example. There are a bunch of people who are better than me at that. The vast majority of the world isn't nearly as good as me because they never do it at all. They never even think about it. And a lot of people grab a chainsaw, oh, I can cut this down, and then it's in their living room, whoops, because they don't understand the stuff involved. And so, and the funny thing is if I'm doing tree jobs for somebody I don't know, I start by telling them, you don't have a reason to trust me. You don't know me. If you don't know anything I've done, you don't have a reason to just assume that I know what the hell I'm doing. So I'll either like demonstrate, look, here's me doing this. Here's me doing this particularly challenging one where I was actually going to post a video of that because a friend of mine up in New Hampshire had this big tree leaning completely the wrong way in an area where it couldn't be taken down one piece, and he didn't want to pay $80 gajillion to have someone come in with a crane and take it down piece by piece. Well, it was a strong lean in exactly the wrong direction towards the house, and it was probably an 80-foot pine, and I convinced it to follow the completely other direction, which is something that most people don't know how to do. Now, this isn't me bragging. I'm sure most of the people listening to this, you have areas of expertise that you know about and I know jack squat about. So I'm using it as an example. But nobody should just decide that I'm an expert based on nothing because I say I am. If I can demonstrate it by, here, watch me take this tree down in a way that you were a little bit nervous. And it's funny because the neighbor, I ended up doing work for them too, because they watched me do that. I'm like, holy crap, this guy knows what he's doing, because he actually did it. He made that tree go not the way it was going to go. If somebody just cut the bottom, that would have been on top of that house. And he magically did all the things and made it go the other way. Okay, maybe he's worth hiring because he's demonstrated that he knows something. And so the deferring to experts is actually a good thing. And if you have a reason to think they're actually an expert. Here's the problem. You get two sides here, and they're both a disaster. You get people who don't defer to experts because their level of understanding is so low that they have no way to tell if somebody's an expert. This describes absolutely everybody who listened to Terrence Howard talk on the Joe Rogan show and thinks he knows a goddamn thing about math. If you think 1 times 1 equals 2, you don't understand anything about math at all. If you fell for his, well, Newton's third law, that sounded like words, and I looked it up, and Newton's third law is a thing. Yeah, it doesn't apply to the number 1. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That isn't math, that's physics. 1 times 1, so you have an action and you have an action. No, you have a bullshitter spewing terms that a lot of people already will be lost in because they don't know anything about anything. But they think, well, it sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but they're in no position to assess whether he knows what he's talking about because they don't know a goddamn thing. Now, how much Terrence Howard actually knows and how much he's just lying through his teeth, hard to say. Whether he has issues or he's just all the way intentionally a con man, don't know. What I do know is he spews absolute bullshit. Now, a good bullshitter is going to include some truth here and there, so people go, yeah, that. And then lots and lots of bullshit. And his ramblings on was lots and lots of bullshit. And then ideas stolen from other people and mangled. But using the example of the 1 times 1 equals 2. Oh, and the thing where he goes, oh, I'm going to do this clever thing that'll make people go ooh and ah who failed, first level algebra, which is if you take 2 and you take the square root of it and then you double that. But over here you take 2 and the square root of that and then you cube it. They're the same number. Coincidence? No, basic algebra. 2x equals x cubed. Is there a number for which doubling it will give you the same thing as cubing it? Well, find out. 2x equals x cubed. Now, 0 happens to work because it runs everything to 0. Is there a non-zero thing? Well, let's see. 2x equals x cubed. Divide both sides by x is 2 equals x squared. Okay, square root of both. You have x over here and you have the square root of 2 over here. Okay, so that's inherent to how math works. The square root of 2, weirdly, if you double it, you get the same number as if you cube it, as in square root of 2 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. They're the same number. Seems sort of weird if you don't know why. Seems really damn obvious if you understand algebra and you go, oh, because it is the number that fulfills those requirements. Incidentally, negative the square root of 2 does it too, for people looking for things to nitpick about. But people will go, ooh, I did it on my calculator and it came out the way he said. That's so impressive. If that's impressive to you, it's because you don't understand math at all. And he's betting on you not understanding math. He's betting on a lot of people being ignorant enough that they're going to now view him as an expert because they were in no position to judge who is an expert. Now, so I've had back and forth with people about Terrence Howard's bullshit. And it's certainly not the only bullshit. Flat Earth comes to mind. And it's the people who don't know the limitations of their own understanding who think that there isn't such a thing as an expert. Like you have flat earthers trying to lecture literally astronomers. The people who all the way study the paths and the angles and the gravitational pull and the force of the gravity is equal to g, the universal constant, times mass 1 times mass 2 over the square of the distance between them, the inverse square law. Now, I just said a bunch of words. Some of you knew what those words meant and were like, oh, okay, so he knows, the equation, the basic equation for the gravitational force, and which includes the inverse square law, and he knows what that's called. Whoop-de-friggin-do. Like, millions of people understand that, or like, yeah, okay, he got that right. Lots of you probably, because you don't care about this stuff and you haven't thought about this stuff, which is fine, doesn't make you an idiot, just means you don't know that particular stuff. Who cares? You don't need to. But a lot of you probably heard that and went, well, that sounded like he knew what he was talking about, but I don't know what the hell it meant. Well, that's the problem. If I say a bunch of words that you don't know what they mean, and Terrence Howard says a bunch of words and you don't know what they mean, and we have competing conclusions that don't match, how the hell are you going to know which one's true? You're not. You're not going to know which one's true until you build up a foundational understanding enough that at least you can judge whether somebody is absolutely full of crap or maybe has something worth considering. So I see a lot of people, well, I have to consider his points. What points? So remember the test of the mechanic where I go to the mechanic and he explains it and I go, okay, I think I generally know what you're talking about. And I go back home and explain to Amanda, he says this is what the problem is, and then we decide what to do about it. If you can't put into your own words at least a rough approximation of the expert that just had you oohing and ahhing, you're in no position to say whether he's an expert and in no position to say whether he said anything true. So when all the people are oohing and ahhing over Terrence Howard's bullshit, and I say, okay, I'm going to write out for you a sentence that he said, what did he mean? From your understanding, what does this mean? He properly opened the flower of life and conjugated the waves. What did he mean by that? You have no fucking idea. So you have no way to know if that was something genius or something idiotic or a theory that might be worth something or might not. You're in no position to say a damn thing about it if you can't even paraphrase what the hell it means. And that's most people, almost everybody who fell for his crap. Now, there is a level of understanding where if you understand enough and somebody, like, whatever, pick some topic that you know a bunch about. If somebody comes along and starts pretending, yeah, I'm an expert in that field of thought. Let's say you know a bunch about botany or something. And somebody, that's plants for you, for those of you who didn't know that. Somebody comes along, oh yeah, I'm an expert botanist. And then he starts spouting just gibberish that doesn't mean anything and it's just contradictory noise. And you actually understand the field of thought enough to immediately recognize this guy's full of shit. He isn't a botanist. He isn't anything. He memorized some terms and learned how to confidently spew out meaningless crap. If you're in a position where your level of understanding and your knowledge base is enough that you can say, yeah, he's full of shit. He's not an expert in anything. That's one thing. Now, you can have enough knowledge to hear somebody make a claim and disagree with them. That's a very different thing. To say, well, he says this, in biology or something. There's biologists argue and disagree about everything. Like they change classifications of things on a daily basis. Because it turns out this is more like that. Well, I have a theory about, there's lots of debatable room to arguing, and then there's just stupid gibberish. But you have to have a certain amount of understanding to know the difference between useful discussions and theories and stupid gibberish. So you have people who do this weird thing of, I don't trust the experts. Okay, first of all, are you in a position to determine who the experts are? Now, if not, it doesn't mean you just believe them. It means you don't get to know if they're experts or not. So deferring to an expert when you can't tell if they're an expert is kind of stupid because you don't know if you're deferring to an expert or deferring to a bullshit artist. Or deferring to some ignoramus who might know a little bit about it, but not very much. If you're not in a position to know, then deferring to an expert is stupid. But then you get people who their level of education in whatever categories, maybe it's in all categories, maybe they're overall ignoramus, or maybe it's just a particular field of thought. They don't know that much, and they get two alleged experts giving competing opinions. There is an attraction to the idea of having special knowledge. And this has sucked more people into it than almost anything. Oh, this guy is saying the earth is flat. Okay, it's not. But if you don't understand anything and you're looking at, well, that guy who works for NASA, NASA shield, he says the earth is spherical. But this guy with this YouTube channel over here says some things that I don't understand and can't refute, and I don't know half the terms he's talking about. But it sounds persuasive because he speaks confidently and he says stuff and he shows charts and stuff. You're choosing based on your feels because you don't have enough of an understanding to choose either one, including the guy who actually has it right. You don't know enough to know whether he has it right because your knowledge base is like down here. So you're just deciding based on your feels, well, it would be cool if I believe this thing and I'm in the minority and like I have special knowledge that most people don't have. That's never how you find the truth. Even when the truth is something weird that contradicts mainstream wisdom, which can be true and has been lots of times over and over again, where everybody thought this and somebody came along and said, I think it might be this. But they knew enough to actually show data and evidence and logic, and then there's arguing back and forth. And then a lot of people will defer to the other experts who were actually wrong the whole time because, well, they must be right because they have like credentials on their wall and stuff. No, it doesn't work that way either. So I'm going to end this on the most annoying part to me. There are experts in the world. You have to understand a certain amount in their field of thought for your opinion on their expertise to mean anything. And that's why there's the thing of organizations and credentials, not government licenses. Screw that. That's just coercion and another racket. But if a whole bunch of astronomers go, yeah, that guy knows what he's talking about, then if you know almost nothing about it, you can think, well, either all of them are bullshitters, or he at least has a high enough understanding that the other people in that field respect him and say, well, he's not a complete buffoon and he's not totally full of crap. And then he has this theory that may or may not match, conventional wisdom and all that. Here's the trouble. Once upon a time, you could, for the most part, defer to experts if lots of other experts in that field say, yeah, that guy kind of knows what he's talking about, whether it's like archaeology or biology or whatever. Here's the problem. When power and money comes along and buys people's expertise and pays them to lie, it adds an extra horrible factor on top of it. And in the last few years with the COVID bullshit, we saw probably the most shining example of that in history, where thousands and thousands and thousands of doctors lied. They knew it was a lie. They understand enough that they knew there was no basis to think the masks would do any good. They had the data readily available. They knew that was bullshit, but they didn't dare to stand up and say, that's bullshit, because they were too spineless to possibly risk their reputation, their career, their income, their job, to actually be the useful thing an expert can actually be, which is somebody who tells the people who don't understand it the truth. And almost none of them did, because they're a bunch of spineless frickin' cowards. Well, yeah, they're lying their asses off. Fauci's spouting bullshit. CDC's spouting bullshit. WHO's spouting bullshit. We all know it, but we're not going to be the ones to stick our neck out. Well, what's the result of that? Huge numbers of people who used to defer to doctors as the experts now, for very good reason, distrust almost all of them. And they should. The actual experts who stayed quiet about this, and it's just about every immunologist, every virologist, just about every doctor, every statistician who didn't stand up and say, this is bullshit, that's not how anything works. They are the reason that lots of the uneducated rabble no longer respect experts. Because they shouldn't respect experts, because a lot of actual experts demonstrated that they're for sale. That they will lie to save their own asses. Which means nobody should ever defer to your expertise ever again. Because you're not someone who just knows a bunch and tells other people about it. You're someone who knows a bunch and then modifies what they say based on bribes. Well, we pay you this much money for every death you say was a COVID death. Oh, goody, let's falsify some of these death certificates. Nobody should ever trust you ever again. You're a lying sack of shit. The fact that you're actually an expert makes it worse, not better. And that's one meme I see going on. If you're arguing with a scientist and you're not a scientist, then you're just wrong. No, you're leaving out the fact that scientists can be liars too, because they're still just people. They can know the truth and lie about it. And Big Pharma paid huge numbers of dollars to huge numbers of experts to lie their asses off. And they did. And there's nothing at all disputable about that claim. Because since then, everything I was saying about it, as someone who's not all the way an expert in the field, but I know basic statistics and enough to say they're totally lying their asses off, I pointed it out. I got videos taken down. I got a bunch of clueless people deferring to the experts saying, well, you don't know, where's your medical degree? Didn't need one, and I got it all right. They've since admitted everything I said was right. When I said the masks don't do any good, I was right. Their studies prove it. Their studies back from the 1950s proved it. Then there was the new, was it Cochrane study? That proved it all over again. Social distancing didn't do any good. Shutting things down was way more destructive than it helped. By a factor of a gazillion. I was right. The whole sting of time. Not even as an expert, but as somebody who knows enough to know when the experts are lying their asses off. Sadly, that's not most people. They didn't know enough to say, wait a minute, this doesn't, even given my limited knowledge, this doesn't add up. What they're saying to do, shut down, whatever you do, don't go for like a walk out in the sun and get vitamin D or anything. We can't have that. Hide inside. That'll solve this. That was bullshit from day one, and a bunch of people with at least a basic understanding knew it was bullshit, and we watched actual experts lie their asses off. And the result of that is that now you have another gigantic reason for ignorant people to not defer to actual experts. Because actual experts, if they really know the truth, they can still, for the most part, be bought. And then they're not mistaken, they're liars. The people at the CDC and all the politicians and all their talking head bullshitters, they weren't mistaken. Now they're going, oh, well, we didn't know at the time that, yes, you did, you lied, because there was lots and lots of money in lying. And in the process, every one of those experts who's now whining about, oh, the people don't trust us anymore, they shouldn't trust you. Because you lying sacks of shit endangered their lives to cover your ass instead of telling the truth. Because the lot of you, the vast majority of experts, didn't have a spine between them. Now, obviously, there were some exceptions who got yelled at and demonized and condemned and silenced and censored and attacked and fired and everything under the sun because they actually stood up and said, this isn't how anything works. Why are we pretending this is how anything works? Like, we know this isn't how anything works. Stop saying this and stop suggesting solutions that are going to be horribly destructive and do no good at all. So a few people dared to say that. And they actually deserve respect. They deserve a huge amount of respect because, one, they're actually experts, and two, they have spines. Sadly, that was the minority of actual experts. So in this age where everyone has access to the internet, and you might think, well, great, people are going to be way more educated. Depends if they understand anything about anything. They might just be way more gullible and fall for more and more bullshit because any dumbass, including me, can make a YouTube channel and say stuff. And if people don't have the foundational knowledge to be able to judge whether it's true or not, then they're going to be praising Terrence Howard, and they're going to be thinking the earth is flat, and they're going to believe all sorts of crap without any knowledge base to be in any position to assess the truth of any of that. And now on top of that, you have a gigantic reason for them to distrust actual experts. So to all those experts who are now whining about, I worked hard and I studied hard for my degree. Yeah, and then you let a lie continue without countering it, which means nobody should ever trust you ever again. And so that just struck another gigantic blow against the collective intelligence and education of humanity, which was already doing pretty badly. In the U.S. at least. Other countries are that actually focus on learning crap instead of on your feels and your self-esteem and the reality doesn't give a shit about that. If you can't put your own ego below the objective reality outside of yourself and learn from it, then you're just a bumbling, clueless pile of emotion that'll go in whatever direction feels good to you at any given moment, which means you're a pawn of the worst people in the world waiting to happen. And you're the one who's going to be loudest condemning the person who showed up without a mask because you're an idiot, you don't know anything, and you deferred to liars while thinking you were deferring to honest experts. And you weren't. So now you have two sides bashing away at actual understanding. You have experts who are full of crap and lied to save their butts because the establishment wanted them to lie. And then you have bullshitters posing as experts. So who the hell is the rabble supposed to trust and defer to anymore? That's why it's so damn important for people to learn the basics of reality for themselves. If you don't have a basic understanding of mathematics or physics or geometry, get one. You can get it for free now online. The problem is it takes time and effort. The bigger problem is without putting in that time and effort, you are in no position to even make a wild guess about who is an expert and who isn't. You're stuck just wandering around, carrying your own ignorance around, having no idea where to look and no idea who you can trust, because you never bothered to learn enough about reality to actually have a useful opinion about who may or may not be an expert. And a lot of the experts helped make that worse by being professional liars. So here we are now in a country full of people who, a lot of them don't know anything about anything, and they know so little that they don't recognize it when somebody else does actually know something. There's lots of amateur astronomers who know a whole lot about astronomy. And then there's flat earthers saying, we know better than you. You don't know better than anybody. And you don't even know enough to recognize when somebody else is actually proficient in some field of thought. So, yeah, not a great indicator for the future of humanity. And yet, I'm still optimistic. Because the thing is, when statism falls, the belief in the divine right of politicians, most of this stuff equals itself out. Because if you don't have the force of the state making people lie, yeah, you can try to bribe people here and there, but it's a lot harder to censor actual truth and actual experts and actual evidence when you don't have a giant parasitic ruling class able to do that. So I'm actually still, long term, very optimistic, but in the short term, it is really frustrating to see not only how ignorant so many people are, but how bad they are at deciding who to defer to. Whether they defer to nobody and don't understand anything, or defer to bullshit artists and get duped, or defer to actual experts who are lying their ass off and get duped. So that's the state we're in, and it kind of sucks. Part of me is glad that my dad isn't here to see just how stupid a lot of the country has become, because he was an awesome teacher at math and sciences, teaching people how to think so that they can actually understand things for themselves, so that less and less they would need to defer to an expert. But sadly, that's not how most education works. And we are now seeing the not so joyous effects of compounded stupidity. Yeehaw! Have a fabulous day. Go learn something. Even if you know a whole bunch, go learn some more. If you don't know anything, go learn stuff.